George Strait is humiliated at the mall, and his reaction shocked everyone. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Galleria San Antonio, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Maria Gonzalez straightened, a display of designer handbags, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite having been on her feet for nearly 6 hours already. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the weight on her shoulders, working full-time while pursuing her business degree, sending money home to her parents in Laredo, and navigating the often judgmental world of luxury retail. Maria, can you handle the West Wing displays? Blake wants them redone before the afternoon rush, called out Sophia, the assistant manager, her voice carrying across the designer section of Blackwell's department store. Of course, Maria responded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her. Here, she glanced at her watch. Just past 11. The morning had been slow, giving her time to mentally rehearse for her marketing midterm while arranging merchandise that cost more than 3 months of her salary. As she moved toward the West Wing, Maria hummed softly to herself. It was a George Strait melody, Amarillo by Morning, one her father had played countless times during family barbecues. Those songs had been the soundtrack to her childhood, the familiar tunes providing comfort during difficult times when her family had struggled to establish themselves in Texas after immigrating from Mexico City. George Strait wasn't just a musician to the Gonzalez family. He represented their adopted home, the culture they had embraced while holding tight to their roots. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what you think of George's incredible journey so far. Your support means everything to us. What are you humming? The sharp voice cut through Maria's thoughts. Blake Thompson, the new department manager, stood watching her with thinly veiled disdain. At 32, Blake had transferred from the Chicago flagship store 6 weeks ago, bringing with him a reputation for delivering results and a talent for making employees feel perpetually inadequate. Just an old country song, Mr. Thompson, Maria answered, quickly dropping her hands to her sides. Blake adjusted his perfectly tailored jacket. Well, this isn't a honky-tonk, Gonzalez. Our clientele doesn't come here for country music. They come for an atmosphere of sophistication. He emphasized the last word, as though Maria might need help understanding it. Yes, sir, sorry, she replied, keeping her expression neutral despite the familiar sting. It wasn't the first time Blake had made her feel out of place, like her background somehow contaminated the rarefied air of luxury retail. Blake consulted his tablet. The Thornbury event is this weekend. I need you to stay late today and tomorrow to prepare. I assume that won't be a problem? It wasn't really a question. I have an exam tomorrow evening, Maria began, but Blake was already walking away. Change it, he called over his shoulder. This job requires flexibility, Gonzalez. If that's a problem, perhaps retail isn't for you. Maria took a deep breath, forcing down the hot lump of frustration in her throat. The job paid better than most positions available to students, and the employee discount had allowed her to buy her mother a beautiful scarf for her birthday. The first luxury item the hard-working woman had ever owned. Pride and necessity kept Maria's feet firmly planted on the polished floor. The morning crept toward noon, bringing with it an influx of the store's typical clientele, oil executives' wives, tech entrepreneurs, and tourists with platinum credit cards. Maria moved efficiently between customers, her Spanish accent carefully modulated into the neutral tones Blake preferred employees to use. It was during a brief lull that she noticed him, an older man in worn jeans and a simple plaid button-up shirt, browsing thoughtfully in the women's accessories section. His cowboy hat was pulled low, but there was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that caught Maria's attention. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, examining a delicate silver bracelet with large, Weathered hands. Maria was about to approach him when she saw Blake's tall figure cutting purposefully across the floor. Something in the manager's expression, a predatory gleam, made her stomach tighten. She had seen that look before, when Blake spotted someone he deemed unworthy of Blackwell's hallowed retail space. "Can I help you find something, sir?" Blake's voice carried the artificial politeness that barely concealed contempt. The man looked up, a friendly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Just looking for a gift for my granddaughter. Her 16th birthday's coming up." Maria froze halfway across the floor. That voice, the distinctive, warm baritone that had filled her family's small living room countless times. It couldn't be. She studied the man more carefully, taking in the profile that had graced album covers for decades. Blake's smile thinned as he took in the man's appearance, from the scuffed boots to the weathered hat. "I see. Well, perhaps I can direct you to somewhere more suitable. Our pieces here start at several $1,000s. Price isn't a concern," the man said mildly, still examining the bracelet. "My granddaughter mentioned this store specifically, said y'all had some unique pieces." Blake's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Nevertheless, sir, Blackwell's caters to a certain clientele. I'm sure you understand." He reached for the bracelet, his movement suggesting he was reclaiming it from unworthy hands. "The mall has several mid-range options on the lower level that might be more appropriate for your budget." A flush of embarrassment crept up Maria's neck as she watched the interaction unfold. Several customers had paused to observe the scene, their expressions ranging from discomfort to smug amusement. One woman was discreetly filming with her phone. "Sir, I really must insist," Blake continued, his voice hardening. "Allow me to escort you to the main concourse, where you'll find stores better aligned with your needs." The man straightened, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He was tall, taller than Blake, and though his frame was lean, there was strength in his shoulders. For a moment Maria thought he might argue, but instead he simply nodded once. "Well, I wouldn't want to be where I'm not wanted," he said quietly. It was the dignified resignation in his voice that broke Maria's paralysis. Before she could consider the consequences, she was moving across the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Thompson, wait!" Her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "Do you know who this is?" Blake turned to her with irritation. "Gonzalez, return to your section immediately." But Maria had committed now. She stepped forward, placing herself between Blake and the customer. "This is George Strait," she said, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "The king of country music." A murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers. Phones appeared in hands, discreetly recording. Blake's expression flickered from annoyance to uncertainty. "George Strait," he repeated skeptically, looking back at the unassuming man in the cowboy hat. The man removed his hat then, revealing the familiar face that had appeared on magazine covers and album art for over 4 decades. His silver hair caught the light, and his eyes, kind but sharp, met Blake's directly. "That would be me," he said simply. The color drained from Blake's face. As a luxury retail manager, he prided himself on recognizing the wealthy and influential, but he'd failed to identify one of the most successful recording artists in American history. A man worth hundreds of millions who had sold over 100 million albums worldwide. "Mr. Strait," he stammered, "I had no idea." "Clearly," George replied, replacing his hat. His tone wasn't angry, just matter-of-fact. Blake's mortification was visible to everyone watching. Security guards who had been subtly moving closer now retreated, recognizing the situation had taken an unexpected turn. A few customers had abandoned all pretense and were openly filming the encounter, their expressions gleeful at witnessing such a spectacular misjudgment. "I apologize profusely, sir," Blake continued, his professional demeanor crumbling. "Please allow me to personally assist you. Whatever your granddaughter would like." George raised a hand, stopping Blake mid-sentence. "No need for all that. Like I said, I don't want to be where I'm not welcome." His eyes shifted to Maria, a hint of gratitude in them, though it seems not everyone here shares that view. Maria felt her cheeks burn under his gaze. She had grown up listening to this man's music, his songs playing during every significant family event, from birthdays to her quinceañera. Now he was looking at her with appreciation, while her manager looked ready to fire her on the spot. "Mr. Strait," she said, her voice steadier now, "it would be an honor to help you find something for your granddaughter." Blake stepped forward, clearly intending to reclaim control of the situation, but George's attention remained on Maria. "What's your name, young lady?" he asked. "Maria Gonzalez, sir." George nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Maria Gonzalez, I'd appreciate your help. My granddaughter Jennifer is turning 16, and I'm a bit out of my depth with what teenage girls like these days." Blake interjected smoothly, "Mr. Strait, as the department manager, I can assure you that we have some exclusive pieces that never make it to the display floor. If you'll allow me to show you our private collection, I think Maria here will do just fine," George said firmly, effectively dismissing Blake. "She seems to know the difference between a hat and the man wearing it." The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone present. A ripple of whispers spread through the growing crowd of onlookers. Blake's humiliation was complete, rejected by a legend in front of staff, customers, and several recording smartphones. "Of course," Blake managed through gritted teeth. "Maria is one of our finest associates." He turned to her, his eyes conveying a clear message. "This isn't over. Gonzalez, make sure Mr. Strait receives our very best service." As Blake retreated, Maria fought to control her trembling hands. She had potentially just sacrificed her job, but standing by while someone was humiliated, especially someone whose music had been so important to her family, wasn't something she could do. "Thank you for that," George said quietly when Blake was out of earshot. "You didn't have to step in." Maria smiled, her nervousness giving way to genuine warmth. "My father would never forgive me if I didn't, Mr. Strait. Your music has been part of our family since before I was born." George's expression softened. "Well, I'm grateful all the same. Now, about that birthday present, Jennifer mentioned something about silver bracelets with stones that have meaning. Got anything like that?" As Maria led George to a display case containing artisan jewelry, she was acutely aware of eyes following them, customers pretending to shop while keeping the country star in their peripheral vision, staff members whispering behind counters. The story was already spreading throughout the store. "These have semi-precious stones," Maria explained, pointing to a collection of delicate silver pieces. "Each stone represents different qualities: rose quartz for love, amethyst for peace, turquoise for protection." George studied them thoughtfully. "Jennifer's always been drawn to turquoise, says it reminds her of the sky over our ranch." He pointed to a silver cuff bracelet inlaid with vibrant blue stones. "May I see that one?" As Maria carefully removed the bracelet from the display, George asked, "So, how long have you worked here, Maria?" "Almost 2 years, sir. I'm working my way through business school at University of Texas, San Antonio." George nodded approvingly. "Business, huh? Planning to run your own company someday?" "That's the dream," Maria admitted. "My parents came here from Mexico when I was 7. They've worked so hard to give me opportunities they never had. I want to make something of those opportunities." George turned the bracelet over in his hands, examining the craftsmanship. "That's what this country is supposed to be about, working hard and building something better." He glanced in the direction Blake had disappeared, though some folks seemed to forget that. Maria lowered her voice. I'm sorry about how he treated you. George shrugged. Not the first time, won't be the last. When you've been around as long as I have, you learn that some people can only see what's on the surface. He held the bracelet up to the light. This is beautiful work. Jennifer will love it. As Maria wrapped the turquoise bracelet in tissue paper, she noticed George glancing over his shoulder. A small crowd had gathered at a discreet distance, pretending to shop while stealing glances at the country legend. Cell phones peeked out from behind display racks, capturing the moment for social media. Looks like we've drawn an audience, George said with a wry smile. Maria nodded apologetically. Word travels fast in retail. I'm sorry if it's uncomfortable. And it comes with the territory, he replied, his expression revealing nothing of how he felt about the attention. Been dealing with it for 40 years now. As she placed the wrapped bracelet in a signature Blackwell's box, Maria couldn't help but wonder what those 40 years had been like. The highs of performing in packed stadiums, the pressure of maintaining success in a fickle industry, and apparently moments like this being judged by appearance alone, despite his legendary status. Will there be anything else, Mr. Strait? She asked, closing the lid on the box. George seemed to consider something, his eyes drifting toward the direction Blake had disappeared. Actually, I'd like to speak with your manager again, if that's impossible. Maria's stomach tightened. Was George going to demand Blake be fired? She had seen it happen before, wealthy customers wielding their influence to remove staff who had offended them. While Blake certainly deserved some consequence for his behavior, the thought of being responsible for someone losing their livelihood made her uncomfortable. Of course, she said, reaching for the store phone. I can call him over. Before she could dial, Blake reappeared, accompanied by an older woman in an impeccable suit whom Maria recognized as Catherine Wells, the store director. Blake's expression was a careful mask of contrition, though Maria could see the tension in his jaw. Mr. Strait, Catherine said warmly, extending her hand. I'm Catherine Wells, Blackwell's store director. I can't express how honored we are to have you shopping with us today. George shook her hand, his manner cordial but reserved. Ma'am, I understand there was some confusion earlier, Catherine continued, shooting a pointed look at Blake. Please accept our most sincere apologies. Blackwell's prides itself on making every customer feel valued. Every customer? George asked mildly, his emphasis subtle but unmistakable. Catherine had the grace to look embarrassed. Yes, of course. Every customer. Blake stepped forward, his professional smile firmly in place. Mr. Strait, I want to personally apologize for my inexcusable behavior. I made an assumption based solely on appearance, and that was deeply wrong of me. Maria watched the exchange with interest. Blake's words sounded rehearsed, as though he'd practiced them while fetching the store director. There was no genuine remorse in his eyes, only the fear of consequences and damage to his career. George studied Blake for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The crowd of onlookers had grown, employees and customers alike watching with unabashed interest. I appreciate the apology, George finally said, but I'd like to speak privately with you and Ms. Gonzalez here, if that's possible. Catherine blinked in surprise. Of course, you can use my office. She gestured toward the back of the store. Blake, show Mr. Strait the way. As they moved through the store, Maria felt as though she were walking through a dream. The last thing she'd expected when arriving for her shift this morning was to be heading into a private meeting with George Strait and her manager. Customers parted to let them pass, some nodding respectfully to George, others openly staring. Catherine's office was spacious and elegantly appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Antonio skyline. Blake held the door, his expression tightly controlled as George and Maria entered. When the door closed behind them, the sudden quiet felt oppressive. George removed his hat and took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing Catherine's desk. Please, "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the other chairs. Maria perched nervously on the edge of a chair, while Blake remained standing, his posture rigid. 43 years, George said conversationally, breaking the silence. "That's how long I've been recording music. Sold over 100 million albums, performed in every major venue in the country." He leaned back, his manner relaxed despite the tension in the room. "And you know what? I still get treated exactly the way you treated me today, about once a month." Blake shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Strait, again, I'm truly sorry." George raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm not telling you this for another apology. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something important." He leaned forward, his eyes intent. "I don't much care how people treat George Strait, the celebrity. What bothers me is thinking about how you treat folks who aren't George Strait, people who don't have millions of fans ready to be outraged on their behalf when a video goes viral." Maria glanced at Blake, whose face had gone pale at the mention of a viral video. "Those videos are already out there," George continued, as if reading Blake's thoughts. "Can't put that genie back in the bottle. But here's what interests me. What happens next?" "What do you mean, sir?" Maria asked. George turned to her, his expression softening. "Well, Maria, I'm interested in how people respond when they've made a mistake. Do they just worry about saving face, or do they actually learn something?" He looked back at Blake. "That's why I wanted this private conversation, not to get anybody fired or to make a scene, but to ask, what are you going to take away from this?" Blake swallowed hard. For the first time since Maria had known him, he appeared genuinely at a loss. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Strait." "How about starting with the truth?" George suggested. "Not the corporate apology you've been trained to give, but the honest truth about what went through your mind when you saw me walk in." The office fell silent. Maria held her breath, wondering if Blake would actually answer or deflect with another polished apology. After a long moment, Blake exhaled slowly. "I saw the jeans, the worn boots, the old hat. I saw someone who didn't fit my idea of what a Blackwell's customer should look like." His voice grew quieter. "And I made a judgment based on that alone." George nodded. "That's a start. Now let me tell you a story." He settled back in his chair. "Back in 1981, before my first single hit the charts, I walked into a fancy music industry party in Nashville. I was wearing my best clothes, which weren't much, and carrying a demo tape I'd scraped together every penny to record." Maria leaned forward, captivated. This was the kind of story her father would love, the early days of George Strait before he became a legend. "I approached a big-shot producer," George continued. "Fellow took one look at me and said, 'The service entrance is around back, cowboy.'" He chuckled softly at the memory. "Assumed I was staff, not an invited guest." Blake winced visibly. Now, I could have let that moment define me, could have carried that humiliation like a weight. Instead, I let it teach me something valuable. George's eyes were distant, reflecting on the past. "Taught me never to confuse packaging with what's inside. Taught me that dignity isn't something other people can take from you. Only something you can surrender." He focused on Blake again. "That producer later tried to sign me after Unwound hit the top 10. I declined. Not out of spite, but because I'd learned to recognize when someone valued me only for what they could get from me, not for who I was." The office was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Maria felt as though she were witnessing something profound, not just a celebrity handling a public embarrassment, but a man sharing wisdom earned through a lifetime of experience. "I don't want an apology from you," George said to Blake. "What I want is for you to think about how many Marias or George walk through those doors every day. Folks who might not match your idea of what success or wealth looks like, but who deserve the same respect as anyone else." Blake nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I understand." "Do you?" George asked, not unkindly. "Because understanding means changing." not just nodding and going back to business as usual once the cameras are gone and the excitement dies down. Maria watched as something shifted in Blake's expression, a crack in the polished veneer he'd maintained since his arrival at Blackwell's. For the first time, she glimpsed something genuine in his eyes. "My grandfather was a janitor," Blake said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even him. "Worked nights cleaning office buildings in Chicago for 30 years. Wore the same and pairs of jeans until they were more patch than original fabric." He looked down at his perfectly tailored suit. "I guess somewhere along the way, I started believing that success meant distancing myself from where I came from." George nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Easy trap to fall into, harder one to climb out of." Blake looked directly at George, then at Maria. "I am sorry. Not just because you're George Strait, but because no one should be treated the way I treated you today." The sincerity in his voice surprised Maria. Perhaps there was more to Blake Thompson than the calculating manager she'd known these past 6 weeks. George stood, reaching for his hat. "Well, I should let you two get back to work. Appreciate the conversation." "Mr. Strait," Maria said impulsively, "can I ask what made you want to talk to us privately instead of what most people would do?" George settled his hat on his head, considering her question. "When you've been around as long as I have, you learn that public shaming rarely changes hearts. Might change behavior for a while out of fear, but not for the right reasons." He shrugged. "Besides, everybody deserves a chance to show who they really are when the spotlight's off." As they prepared to leave the office, Blake cleared his throat. "Mr. Strait, for what it's worth, I meant what I said. This has been eye-opening." George nodded. "Good. Then something worthwhile came out of all this." When they emerged from the office, the store had returned to its normal rhythm, though Maria noticed how heads turned as George passed. Catherine Wells approached immediately, her expression anxious. "I hope everything is resolved to your satisfaction, Mr. Strait," she said. "It is," George replied simply. Catherine looked relieved. "Wonderful. And please, the bracelet you selected is our gift, a small token of our apology." George shook his head. "Appreciate the gesture, but I'll pay. My granddaughter should know her gift was earned honestly." As Maria processed the transaction, she was aware of Blake watching from a respectful distance, his expression thoughtful. Whatever had happened in that office had affected him, whether temporarily or permanently remained to be seen. "There you go, Mr. Strait," Maria said, handing him the signature blue bag. "I hope your granddaughter loves it." "Thank you, Maria," he replied, taking the bag. Then, more quietly, he added, "You showed real courage today. Standing up for a stranger when it might have cost you something important, that says a lot about your character." Maria felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "Thank you, sir. Your music has meant so much to my family. My father would never believe this happened." A smile crinkled the corners of George's eyes. "Well, we'll have to do something about that, won't we?" He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "Have your folks give my office a call? I'm playing the AT&T Center next month. Be nice to meet them." Maria stared at the business card in her trembling hand, unable to believe what had just happened. The embossed text caught the light, Strait Productions, with a phone number and email address beneath. George Strait had casually handed her a direct line to his world, as if offering directions to the nearest coffee shop. "Thank you, Mr. Strait. My parents will be speechless." George smiled, the genuine warmth reaching his eyes. "Looking forward to meeting them. Just tell Norma who answers the phone that George from the shopping mall said to call." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked toward the exit, the Blackwell shopping bag swinging gently from his weathered hand. Blake approached as George disappeared through the glass doors, a curious mix of emotions playing across his face. "That was not what I expected," he said quietly. Maria tucked the card carefully into her pocket. "What did you expect?" Blake shook his head. "Demands for an apology press conference. My termination, certainly not a private conversation about, character." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disrupting its precision. "In Chicago, I once saw a reality TV star reduce a sales associate to tears over a misplaced decimal point, then demand a 50% discount for the emotional distress." Despite herself, Maria felt a twinge of sympathy for Blake. The man standing beside her seemed different from the coldly efficient manager who had made her feel insignificant for weeks. "Famous people are still just people," she offered. "Some good, some not so good." Blake's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. With a grimace, he pulled it out, scrolling through a rapid succession of notifications. "And so it begins," he muttered. "The videos are already trending." Maria peered over his shoulder at the screen. Sure enough, shaky footage captured by customers showed George Strait being confronted by Blake, followed by Maria's intervention. The clips cut off before the private conversation, leaving viewers with only the public humiliation and none of the redemption that had followed. "King of Country Humiliated is trending," Blake said, his voice hollow. "My full name is in the description of the top video. Over 50,000 views already." Catherine Wells materialized beside them, her professional composure noticeably strained. "Blake, my office, now. Maria, please return to your section." Her tone left no room for discussion. As Maria walked back to her display area, she could feel the eyes of co-workers and customers following her. Sophia intercepted her path, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind a display case. "What happened?" Sophia hissed, her eyes wide with excitement. "Everyone's saying you saved George Strait from Blake and then went into some secret meeting." Maria extricated her arm gently. "It wasn't exactly like that. Mr. Strait just wanted to talk privately." "About getting Blake fired? Please tell me Blake is getting fired." Sophia had made no secret of her dislike for the new manager who had criticized her sales techniques on his first day. "No, nothing like that," Maria replied, uncomfortable with Sophia's eagerness for Blake's downfall, despite her own complicated feelings about him. It was more personal than that. Sophia looked disappointed. "Well, you're the hero of the store right now. Everyone's talking about how you stood up to Blake, and several customers recorded the whole thing. It's blowing up online." Maria's stomach tightened. She hadn't considered how quickly the incident would spread beyond the store. What had felt like a private moment of courage now belonged to the world, edited and contextualized by strangers. "I need to get back to work," she said, moving toward her section. For the rest of her shift, Maria alternated between helping customers and checking her phone. The videos continued to gain traction, with local news outlets picking up the story. By closing time, her social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and messages from strangers, many praising her for standing up to Blake, others asking for details about George Strait. As she clocked out, Maria noticed Blake in Catherine's office, still engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. The store director was gesturing emphatically while Blake nodded, his shoulders uncharacteristically slumped. Outside, the Texas evening was settling in, the heat of the day, giving way to a warm, dusty twilight. Maria walked to the employee parking lot, her mind swirling with the day's events. She had yet to call her parents. The conversation deserved more than a rushed explanation between bus stops. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed Blake calling her name. He was hurrying across the parking lot, his tie loosened and suit jacket slung over one arm. "Maria, wait," he called, slightly out of breath as he caught up to her. "Can we talk for a minute?" She hesitated, keys in hand. "I need to catch my bus. I can drive you home," he offered, then quickly added, "or wherever you're going, no pressure. I wanted to thank you." Maria blinked in surprise. "Thank me? For what?" Blake looked around the parking lot, as if searching for eavesdroppers. "For not jumping on the bandwagon. The internet has decided I'm the villain of the year, but you could have made it much worse. You didn't tell anyone what happened in that office, even though sharing it might have made you look even better." Maria hadn't thought of it that way. She'd kept the conversation private because it had felt private, a moment of genuine connection between three people that wasn't meant for public consumption. "It wasn't my story to tell," she said simply. Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, thank you anyway." He glanced at his watch. "Your bus is coming soon?" 20 minutes, Maria admitted, "but I need to call my parents before it arrives." "Right, about the concert." Blake shifted his weight awkwardly. "Look, I know I haven't been the easiest person to work with, but I meant what I said in that office today, and I'd like to make it up to you somehow." Maria studied him, searching for the calculating manager she'd known for 6 weeks. Instead, she saw someone struggling with a public failure, attempting to navigate unfamiliar emotional territory. "You don't owe me anything," she said finally. "Maybe not, but I'd still like to help if you'll let me." He hesitated. "I heard you mention an exam tomorrow night. Is that why you're rushing home? To study?" Maria nodded. "Marketing midterm, 20% of my final grade." "Marketing?" Blake's expression brightened slightly. "That's actually my background. MBA from Northwestern with a specialization in luxury brand marketing." "I didn't know that," Maria said, surprised that Blake had never mentioned his education despite his frequent references to his Chicago experience. "There's a lot you don't know about me," Blake said, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I could help you prepare for the exam. My car's over there. We could grab coffee somewhere quiet, go over your notes. Least I can do after today." Maria hesitated, weighing her options. She had planned to study alone in her small apartment, as she always did, but Blake's marketing expertise could be valuable, especially for a course that focused on luxury retail strategies. "All right," she decided. "There's a coffee shop near my apartment that's open late." 20 minutes later, they were seated in the corner of Café Esperanza, a small, family-owned establishment that blended Mexican and American influences in its decor and menu. Maria spread her textbook and notes across the wooden table while Blake returned from the counter with 2 coffees. "I ordered yours black," he said, placing a steaming mug before her. "Wasn't sure how you take it." "Black is perfect," Maria replied, surprised he hadn't assumed she preferred something sweeter. As they settled into reviewing market segmentation strategies, Maria gradually relaxed. Blake was a different person outside the store, still intense and detail-oriented, but lacking the cold judgment that had characterized their previous interactions. He explained concepts clearly, relating theoretical frameworks to practical examples from his own experience. "The thing about luxury marketing," he explained, drawing a diagram on a napkin, "is that you're never just selling a product. You're selling belonging, exclusivity, the story behind the craftsmanship." Maria nodded, making notes in the margins of her textbook. "Like how Blackwell's isn't just selling jewelry, but the experience of being the kind of person who shops at Blackwell's." "Exactly," Blake said, looking impressed, "which is why I was so—" He stopped abruptly, his expression clouding. "So quick to judge George Strait," Maria finished for him, "because he didn't look like he belonged in that narrative." Blake nodded, shamefaced. "I was going to say short-sighted, but wrong is more accurate." He stared into his coffee. "You know what the strangest part is? When I was growing up, my grandfather used to play George Strait albums while he fixed things around the house. I knew who he was. I just didn't recognize him out of context. Maria considered this. Sometimes we see what we expect to see, or what we're trained to see, Blake added. In luxury retail, we're conditioned to identify certain markers of wealth and status. When those markers are absent, we make assumptions. He shook his head. That's no excuse, though. As they continued studying, Maria's phone buzzed with a text. It was from her mother. "Mika, are you seeing the news? Everyone is talking about George Strait at your store." Blake noticed her expression change. "Everything okay?" "My parents just found out about what happened today. The story's spreading fast." She typed a quick response, promising to call when she got home. Blake's phone was also lighting up with notifications. He glanced at it briefly before turning it face down on the table. "Catherine gave me quite the lecture," he admitted. "Corporate is in damage control mode. They want me to issue a formal apology, maybe do some community outreach to counteract the negative publicity." "Is your job in danger?" Maria asked, surprised by her own concern. Blake shrugged. "Probably not, unless the story gets much bigger. Luxury brands hate public relations disasters, but they're also pragmatic. Firing me would just keep the story in the news cycle longer." He took a sip of his coffee. "Honestly, I'm more worried about what my grandfather would think if he saw those videos." The vulnerability in his voice caught Maria off guard. For the first time, she saw Blake as a complete person, someone with family, with insecurities, with a past that had shaped him just as her own had shaped her. "What would he think?" she asked gently. Blake was quiet for a long moment. "He'd be disappointed," he finally said. "He was always big on treating people right, no matter who they were. Used to say you could tell everything about a person by how they treated those who could do nothing for them." He smiled ruefully. "Didn't exactly live up to that today, did I?" Maria considered his words. Maybe today wasn't about living up to it. Maybe it was about remembering it. Blake looked at her with newfound respect. "You're pretty wise for a college student, Maria Gonzalez." "My parents taught me well," she replied, thinking of her father's unwavering dignity in the face of prejudice, her mother's quiet strength through years of sacrifice. As they packed up their study materials, Blake seemed reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for giving me a chance to help," he said. "It felt good to, I don't know, do something constructive after today's mess." "You know your marketing," Maria acknowledged. "I feel much better about tomorrow's exam." Outside the cafe, the night had settled fully over San Antonio, the stars obscured by city lights but present nonetheless. Blake insisted on driving Maria to her apartment building, though it was only a few blocks away. As they pulled up to the modest complex where Maria lived, Blake turned to her with an unexpectedly serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Maria replied, gathering her backpack. "Why did you really step in today? You must have known it might cost you your job." Maria considered the question. "I couldn't watch someone be humiliated like that," she said finally. "Especially not someone whose music meant so much to my family. But honestly, I think I would have done it even if it hadn't been George Strait." Blake studied Maria's face in the dim light of his car, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "I believe you would have," he said finally, "and that's what makes you different from most people." Maria shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I should go. Thank you for the study help." She reached for the door handle. "Maria," Blake said, stopping her, "whatever happens with all this, the videos, the store, everything, I just want you to know I respect what you did today." She nodded, unsure how to respond to this new version of Blake. "Good night," she said simply, stepping out into the warm Texas night. Inside her small one-bedroom apartment, Maria dropped her backpack on the worn sofa and kicked off her shoes. The events of the day seemed surreal now. Had she really met George Strait? Stood up to her intimidating manager? Been given tickets to a concert? Her phone buzzed insistently, reminding her of the promised call to her parents. Taking a deep breath, she dialed home. Mija. Her mother's voice came through immediately, vibrating with excitement. Tell us everything. We saw the videos online. George Strait himself, in your store. Maria could hear her father in the background, asking questions in rapid-fire Spanish. For the next 20 minutes, she recounted the day's events, carefully editing certain details about Blake. Despite his transformation this evening, she didn't want to risk her father driving to Blackwell's to confront the man who had humiliated his daughter's musical hero. And then, Maria concluded, her voice dropping to a whisper even though she was alone, he gave me his business card, said we should call about tickets to his concert next month. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Maria checked to see if the call had dropped. Then came the sound of her father's voice, thick with emotion. Es verdad, Maria? George Strait wants to meet us? Yes, Papa, it's true. She pulled the business card from her pocket, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. He said to call and ask for Norma. Her father began speaking rapidly about his favorite George Strait songs, the first album he'd bought after coming to America, how the music had helped him learn English. Her mother interrupted to ask practical questions. What would they wear? Should they bring a gift? Was Maria certain this wasn't some kind of joke? It's real, Mama, Maria assured her. I'll make the call tomorrow after my exam. When she finally ended the call, promising to visit on Sunday for dinner, Maria felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The emotional roller coaster of the day, from the confrontation to the private conversation to the unexpected study session with Blake, had left her drained. She was about to head for the shower when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Blake, frowning, Maria opened her student email account. There, at the top of her inbox, was a message from Blake, Thompson Blackwell Retail, com with the subject line, for your marketing exam. The email contained a comprehensive set of notes on luxury retail marketing strategies, complete with case studies, practical examples, and several practice questions with detailed explanations. At the bottom was a simple note. Thought these might help. Good luck tomorrow. Blake. Maria stared at the screen, once again trying to reconcile this thoughtful gesture with the cold, judgmental manager she'd known for weeks. People could surprise you, she supposed, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better. After reviewing Blake's notes and finishing her own studying, Maria finally fell into bed well past midnight, dreaming of turquoise bracelets and concert stadiums. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect Texas spring day. Maria woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone, Sophia calling. "Have you seen the news?" Sophia demanded without preamble. "I just woke up," Maria mumbled, still half asleep. "Turn on KSAT right now," Sophia insisted. "They're doing a whole segment on what happened yesterday." Fully awake now, Maria fumbled for her remote and turned on her small television. Sure enough, there on the screen was a local news anchor standing outside Blackwell's. What began as a case of mistaken identity has sparked a national conversation about judgment and appearance, the reporter was saying. Yesterday, country music legend George Strait was reportedly asked to leave this high-end department store when a manager failed to recognize him. What happened next has social media buzzing. The broadcast cut to carefully edited clips from customers' phones, showing Blake's dismissive treatment and Maria's intervention. Maria winced as she saw herself on screen, her voice sounding higher and more nervous than she remembered. "That young woman," the anchor continued, "has been identified as Maria Gonzalez, a student at UTSA working part-time at the store. Sources tell us that instead of demanding the manager's termination, Strait requested a private conversation with both employees." The screen showed a photograph of George Strait leaving the store, shopping bag in hand, his expression serene beneath his cowboy hat. In an industry often characterized by celebrity demands and public call-outs, Strait's measured response has drawn praise from fans and retail workers alike, the reporter continued. While Blackwell's corporate office has issued an apology, the incident has sparked a larger conversation about how we judge others based on appearance alone. Maria muted the television as Sophia's voice came through the phone. "You're famous. How does it feel?" "Weird," Maria admitted. "I didn't do anything special." "Are you kidding? You stood up to Blake Thompson in front of everyone for George Strait." Sophia's voice rose with each exclamation. "Half the staff wants to buy you lunch, and the other half is just jealous they weren't there." "Is Blake? How is he handling all this?" Maria asked cautiously. Sophia's tone changed. "Actually, that's the other reason I called. Blake came in early this morning and called a staff meeting. He apologized." Apologized? To everyone for his management approach since arriving from Chicago. Said he'd lost sight of some important values and promised things would be different going forward. Sophia sounded bewildered. Then he announced he's implementing a store-wide training program on unconscious bias and customer service. Catherine looked like she'd seen a ghost. Maria sat on the edge of her bed, processing this information. It seemed Blake's transformation hadn't been limited to their coffee shop conversation. "Anyway," Sophia continued, "everyone's talking about you. The regional manager even called asking for your contact information, something about a potential brand ambassador program." After promising to call Sophia back later, Maria prepared for her day, her mind swirling with the surreal developments. As she headed to campus for her marketing exam, she noticed people on the bus glancing at her, then at their phones, then back at her. By the time she reached her classroom, 3 classmates had approached asking if she was the girl from the George Strait video. Despite the distractions, Maria felt surprisingly calm as she took her exam. Blake's notes had been extremely helpful, and she found herself confidently navigating questions about market segmentation and luxury brand positioning. When she emerged from the classroom 2 hours later, she had 2 missed calls from Blackwell's corporate office and a text from Blake. "How was the exam?" She responded truthfully. "Better than expected. Thank you for the notes." His reply came quickly. "Glad to help. Catherine wants to speak with you before your next shift. Nothing to worry about." Taking a deep breath, Maria found a quiet bench on campus and pulled out George Strait's business card. It was time to make the call she'd promised her parents. With slightly trembling fingers, she dialed the number. "Strait Productions," answered a friendly female voice. "Hello," Maria began, her mouth suddenly dry. "My name is Maria Gonzalez. Mr. Strait gave me this number yesterday at Blackwell's department store. He said to ask for Norma." "One moment, please." The line went silent, and Maria held her breath. Part of her still couldn't believe this was happening, that George Strait had given her his personal business card, that she was calling about concert tickets, that her quiet life had suddenly become so public. "This is Norma," came a warm voice with a slight Texas drawl. "You must be the young lady George mentioned." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, her heart pounding. "He said something about tickets to his concert next month?" "He certainly did. Told me all about what happened at that store." Norma's tone was kind but knowing. "Said you showed real character, standing up for him like that." Maria felt her cheeks warm. "It wasn't anything special, ma'am." "Well, George seems to think it was. He's set aside 4 VIP passes for you and your family for the May 15th show at the AT&T Center. Includes a private meet and greet before the show." Maria nearly dropped the phone. 4 passes, a meet and greet. "That's right, honey. You can bring your parents and 1 more person of your choosing. Just give me their names so I can add them to the list." As Maria provided her parents' names, adding Sophia as her 4th guest, she felt a wave of gratitude. Her father, who had played George Strait's music during every significant family moment, would actually meet his musical hero, all because she'd followed his teachings about standing up for what was right. "Everything's all set," Norma confirmed. "You'll receive an email with the details. George is looking forward to meeting your family." After thanking Norma profusely, Maria ended the call and sat staring at her phone in disbelief. The magnitude of what was happening finally hit her. From a routine workday to national news to VIP concert passes in just 24 hours. She was about to call her parents with the good news when her phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Is this Maria Gonzalez?" came a professional female voice. "Yes, it is, Ms. Gonzalez. My name is Eleanor Patterson with Apex Media Group. We've been following your story with great interest. Our morning show would like to invite you for an interview about your experience with George Strait and the important conversation it started about judgment and appearance." Maria froze. A national morning show, interviews. This was spiraling, beyond anything she'd anticipated. I don't know," she stammered. "It was just a moment. I didn't do it for attention." "Which is exactly why people are responding so positively," Eleanor said smoothly. "In an era of performative outrage and cancel culture, your genuine action and Mr. Strait's measured response stands out. We'd fly you to New York, of course, all expenses paid." Maria's mind raced. New York? A television appearance? What would her parents think? What would Blake think? What would George Strait think if she started doing media about their private conversation? "Can I have some time to consider?" she asked, buying herself space to think. "Of course. We'd need your answer by tomorrow morning." The segment would air next week. Eleanor provided her contact information and ended the call with practiced efficiency. As Maria walked slowly back to her apartment, her phone continued to buzz with notifications. Her Instagram followers had jumped from 300 to over 3,000 overnight. Local businesses were sending direct messages offering free services in exchange for mentions. A boutique Western wear store wanted her to model their new collection. It was all happening so fast, too fast. She had never sought attention or fame. She'd simply done what felt right in the moment. What her parents had raised her to do. Inside her apartment, Maria sat at her small kitchen table, trying to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become. The marketing student in her recognized the opportunity presented by this sudden visibility. The daughter of immigrants in her felt the weight of potentially representing her community on national television. And somewhere deeper, a small voice wondered what would happen when the attention inevitably faded. Would things simply return to normal? Was that what she wanted? Her phone rang again. "Blake, I heard from corporate," he said when she answered. "They're implementing my training proposal company-wide, and they want to talk to you about a promotion." "A promotion?" Maria echoed. "Regional management is creating a new position, community outreach coordinator. They want someone who can connect with diverse customer demographics, improve staff training, that sort of thing." Blake's voice had an unfamiliar quality. Excitement, perhaps. "They specifically asked for you." Maria sat down on her sofa, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. I'm just a part-time sales associate. I don't even have my degree yet." "Character counts for something, Maria," Blake said simply. "You showed more of it in 5 minutes than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. They'd work around your class, schedule, offer tuition assistance. It's a genuine opportunity." After hanging up, Maria called the one person whose advice she trusted implicitly, her father. "Papa," she said when he answered, "everything is happening so fast. A TV show wants to interview me. Blackwell's wants to promote me. and I just confirmed our VIP passes to see George Strait." Her father was silent for a moment. "Mija, you remember what I always told you about moments of decision?" Maria smiled, knowing exactly what was coming, that they reveal who we truly are. "See, exactly." His voice was gentle but firm. "All these offers, this attention, they are just noise. The real question is, what feels right to you? What choice will let you look in the mirror tomorrow and be proud of who you see?" By the next morning, Maria had made her decisions. She declined the national TV interview, feeling uncomfortable with the idea of discussing a private conversation for public consumption. Instead, she accepted a brief interview with a local San Antonio station, where she shifted the focus to the importance of looking beyond appearances, never mentioning the details of what George Strait had said to Blake in Catherine's office. She also accepted Blackwell's offer with the condition that she could develop the community outreach program herself, focusing on partnerships with local organizations supporting immigrants and first-generation college students. To her surprise, corporate enthusiastically agreed. The 3 weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Maria balanced her classes with her new responsibilities at Blackwell's, working closely with Blake to develop training programs addressing unconscious bias in customer service. The viral story gradually faded from national attention, though. Locally, she was still occasionally recognized as the girl from the George Strait video. Blake, meanwhile, had undergone a transformation that surprised everyone at Blackwell's. The cold, demanding manager had been replaced by a more thoughtful leader who listened to his staff and acknowledged his own mistakes. In private moments, between meetings, he shared stories of his grandfather with Maria, the janitor who had raised him after his parents' divorce, whose common-sense wisdom he had somehow forgotten in his climb up the corporate ladder. "He would have liked you," Blake told her one afternoon, as they reviewed applications for a scholarship program they were establishing. "He always said character outweighs credentials." "He sounds like my father," Maria replied with a smile. As the day of George Strait's concert approached, Maria's parents called daily with new questions. What should they wear? Was it appropriate to bring a gift? Should her father mention his favorite songs, or would that seem too eager? "Just be yourselves," Maria assured them. "That's who Mr. Strait wants to meet." On the evening of May 15th, Maria, her parents, and Sophia arrived at the AT&T Center 2 hours before the show was scheduled to begin. They were escorted by a friendly staff member to a private room backstage, where several other VIP guests were already gathered, sipping drinks and examining memorabilia displays. Carlos Gonzalez, Maria's father, was uncharacteristically quiet, his normally expressive face solemn with anticipation. Elena Gonzalez, her mother, kept smoothing her dress and checking her makeup in her compact mirror. Sophia bounced on her toes, taking photos of everything with her phone. "I can't believe we're actually here," Sophia whispered to Maria. "I still can't believe you turned down Good Morning America." Maria shrugged. It didn't feel right. That conversation in Catherine's office was private. "You're either the craziest or the most principled person I know," Sophia said, shaking her head. "Probably both." A door at the far end of the room opened, and George Strait walked in, dressed in his signature starched shirt, jeans, and cowboy hat. The room fell, silent as he greeted each group of VIP guests, taking photos and signing items with unhurried courtesy. When he reached the Gonzalez family, his face broke into a genuine smile. "There she is, the brave young lady from Blackwell's." Maria's father stepped forward, his hand extended, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Mr. Strait, I'm Carlos Gonzalez. This is my wife Elena. We cannot thank you enough for inviting us." George shook his hand warmly. "The pleasure's all mine, Mr. Gonzalez. Your daughter made quite an impression. She learned her values at home, sir." Elena added proudly, her accent more pronounced with nervousness. "That much is clear," George replied, his eyes crinkling. "With genuine warmth, Maria tells me your family has been listening to my music for a long time." Carlos nodded eagerly. "Since 1989, when we first came to Texas. Your songs, they helped me learn English, understand this new place that became our home." For the next 15 minutes, George Strait chatted with the Gonzales family as naturally as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. He listened attentively as Carlos described working construction while playing All My Exes Live in Texas on a battered cassette player. He asked Maria about her studies and her new position at Blackwell's. He even posed for extra photos when Elena mentioned her brother back in Mexico, who would never believe they had met the king of country music. As their time together drew to a close, George mentioned casually, "I've been working on a new song, something inspired by what happened that day at the store." Maria looked up in surprise. "Really?" George nodded. "Might play it tonight if it feels right, called Deeper Than Denim." "We would be honored to hear it, Mr. Strait," Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. As the Gonzales family took their VIP seats, close enough to see the expressions on the performers' faces, Maria felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she was startled to see Blake Thompson, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than his usual tailored suit. "Blake, what are you doing here?" He held up a ticket. "Bought it the day after." "Well, thought I should experience the real George Strait, not just the customer in the store." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Mind if I join you? My seat's a few rows back, but there's an empty one here." Maria glanced at her father, who nodded slightly after a moment's consideration. "Sure," she said, making space between herself and Sophia. As Blake settled in, Carlos leaned across Maria. "So you are the famous manager," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes assessing. Blake met his gaze directly. "I am, sir, though infamous might be more accurate." He extended his hand. "Your daughter taught me an important lesson that day, one I won't forget." Carlos studied him for a moment before accepting the handshake. "Good. Because in my experience, Mr. Thompson, it is not the mistakes we make that define us, but how we respond to them." When George Strait took the stage 20 minutes later, the arena erupted. For the next hour, he performed hit after hit, his voice as strong and clear as it had been decades earlier. Maria watched her father singing along to every word, her mother swaying beside him, their hands clasped together as they had been through decades of hardship and joy. Midway through the show, George stepped to the microphone during a break between songs. "I want to try something new tonight," he said, as the crowd quieted expectantly. "Had an experience recently that got me thinking about how quick we are to judge folks by their appearance." Maria felt her pulse quicken. Beside her, Blake sat up straighter. "Wrote this song about that experience," George continued. "It's called Deeper Than Denim." As the band began to play a thoughtful, mid-tempo melody, George's voice filled the arena with lyrics about snap judgments and hidden depths, about dignity that comes from character rather than clothing, about seeing beyond the surface to the person underneath. "'Cause we're all deeper than denim, stronger than seams," he sang in the chorus. "There's more to each story than what can be seen." Maria felt tears welling in her eyes as she recognized the themes from that private conversation in Catherine's office. George hadn't shared the specific details, but he had distilled the essence of that moment into a universal message about human dignity. When the song ended, the arena erupted in applause. Carlos wiped tears from his eyes unashamedly. Even Blake looked moved, his usual composure softened by the music. "Thank you, San Antonio," George said into the microphone. "A special thanks to a young lady named Maria Gonzales, who reminded me and a lot of other folks that courage often comes in quiet packages." Maria sank lower in her seat as people nearby turned to look at her, but her father sat taller, pride radiating from him like heat. After the concert, as they made their way through the crowded corridors toward the exit, Blake turned to Maria. "I've been offered a transfer back to Chicago," he said abruptly. "Oh," Maria replied, surprised by the pang of disappointment she felt. "Are you going to take it?" Blake shook his head. "I turned it down, asked to stay in San Antonio instead." He glanced at Carlos and Elena walking ahead of them. "Still have a lot to learn here, I think." 6 months later, Maria stood in the center of a classroom at Antonio Aguirre High School, a school serving predominantly first-generation American students in one of San Antonio's working-class neighborhoods. Around her, students watched attentively as she explained the basics of business marketing. "Today, we have a special guest," she announced, "someone who knows a lot about luxury retail and brand management." Blake entered, carrying presentation materials for their monthly workshop, part of Blackwell's new community outreach program that had become a model for the entire retail chain. "And next month," Maria continued, "we'll have another special visitor, a local business owner who started with nothing but determination and a dream." She smiled at her father, who had recently opened his own small construction company after 25 years of working for others. After the workshop, Maria and Blake walked to the parking lot together, discussing plans for expanding the program to more schools. "Heard from George Strait's team yesterday," Blake mentioned casually. "They want to feature our program in some promotional materials for his charitable foundation." "Really? That's amazing," Maria replied. "Apparently, Deeper Than Denim is becoming something of an anthem for anti-bias initiatives across Texas," Blake continued. "Get #1 on the country charts last week." Maria smiled, thinking of how far they'd all come from that moment in Blackwell's 6 months earlier. Her new role had exceeded her expectations, allowing her to connect her retail experience with her passion for helping her community. Blake had become not just a colleague, but a friend, his transformation from judgmental manager to thoughtful mentor, complete. And her father, seeing his pride as he launched his own business, had been the greatest reward of all. "You know what my grandfather used to say?" Blake asked as they reached their cars. "What's that?" "That sometimes the worst moments in life become the best if you're brave enough to learn from them." He smiled. I think he was right. As Maria drove home that evening, she reflected on the strange, winding path her life had taken since that ordinary spring day when George Strait walked into Blackwell's. She had never sought attention or fame, had never imagined standing up to her intimidating manager, had never dreamed of inspiring a country music legend. She had simply done what felt right in the moment, what her parents had taught her through word and example. And somehow, that one small act of courage had created ripples that continued to spread outward, touching lives far beyond her own. Sometimes, Maria thought as she turned onto her street, the truest measure of character wasn't found in grand gestures or public statements, but in those quiet moments when no one was watching. In the end, we're all deeper than denim, more complex than what the world sees at first glance. And sometimes it takes a king in cowboy boots to remind us of that simple truth.